coming together of three streams, if you like, three types of ingredients for the gospel. First of all, and most important, is the living tradition about Jesus that was alive in the early church and was the central core of meaning and inspiration for it. This is the stories about Jesus, the living memory about who he was and what he meant to the Christian faith and to the people who held that faith. This was carried on in the church's preaching. It was the stories told at the liturgy, the accounts about Jesus. It was the meaning of his words for their moral life. It took place in their catechesis, in some of their conflicts even. This whole picture, this corporate profile, if you like, of Jesus was carried on in the different ways within the Christian community. And then a second important component of the Gospels is the particular situation in which each of the Gospels was composed, the communities from which they emerged. And each of these communities had their own circumstances, sometimes under persecution or perhaps going through a profound transition or wanting to articulate the mission in a new and fresh way. And so certainly that has some influence on what emphasis are given in the story of Jesus and how the story is told within the gospel. A third component in the formation of the gospel is the evangelist himself. Each of these evangelists have their own style of writing Greek. Each have their own perspective and their own experience through which the gospel is composed and leaves an imprint on the gospel. One can tell when you look closely at the Greek language of the four Gospels that they have different styles, different capacity for writing, a different sense of imagery. So these three factors, the tradition about Jesus, the context of the community, and the capacity, if you like, or literary style of the evangelist who finally composed this gospel in harmony with his own community. These give the particular characteristics to the four Gospels. And in the case of John, this coming together of components emerges in a gospel that is a very different kind of gospel. As one commentator has called it, the maverick gospel, the gospel that sort of rides separate from the rest. For example, just to think about some of the things that are not in John's gospel that are very characteristic of the other three gospels. There are no parables, these stories of Jesus that are so characteristic of the material in Mark, Matthew, and Luke are not found in John's gospel. There's no exorcisms, that powerful, liberating action of Jesus that is so characteristic again of Matthew and Mark and Luke's gospel. There are none of those in John's account of the mission of Jesus. And the three synoptic gospels, again, sort of frame the life of Jesus in terms of one great dramatic journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, from the place of his mission in Galilee to his crucifixion and resurrection in Jerusalem. But in John's gospel, Jesus shuttles back and forth several times between Galilee and Jerusalem. So that single journey framework does not exist in John. Also, in the synoptic gospels, there's a very frequent reference to the metaphor of the kingdom of God. This is sort of the keynote of Jesus' preaching in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, but it's used very rarely in John's gospel, primarily in the discourse with Nicodemus. And then there are other characteristics of John that give it great distinction. It uses a lot of discourses of Jesus, long meditative reflections, if you like, both with his disciples or sometimes with his opponents, as he speaks primarily about himself and his own mission. And then John's gospel has a kind of cosmic and spatial imagery that frames the whole drama of the gospel. In the synoptics, we're mainly in a kind of chronological framework. We think about the past in Israel, we think of Jesus' present mission, and the gospel looks forward to the consummation of history with the coming of Jesus at the parousia, the second coming. But in John's gospel, the framework is sort of spatial. He speaks about the world above and the world below, and it's moving back and forth between the above and the below in the spatial imagery that the drama of salvation takes place.